He sat behind the wheel of an aging cab, city lights flickering through the rain-speckled windshield, and let out a quiet sigh. This wasn't just any taxi driver. This was the same man whose cool, logical mind once guided the Starship Enterprise through uncharted galaxies. The contrast couldn't be more stark, a silver screen legend reduced to ferrying late-night strangers for pocket change. Yet every mile logged, every fare collected, held its own strange solace. Tonight, he was anonymous. Tonight, he could simply be himself. It wasn't always like this. Once, he stood in bright studio lights, transformed into an otherworldly figure. Pointy ears, ink-black haircut, arched eyebrows. Live long and prosper, heat intoned, voice calm as ice, sealing hearts around the world. His portrayal of Spock became a cultural touchstone, a symbol of intellect and composure in a turbulent era. Fan conventions swelled, screaming admirers pressed forward, desperate for a glimpse of their hero. Autograph lines snaked down hallways. Camera flashes erupted at every gesture. It was glory. It was pandemonium. Behind the scenes, though, another story was unfolding, one few ever saw. For years, he poured himself into the role, embodying logic so completely that the boundary between character and man began to blur. Spock wasn't just a part he played. Spock was a mask he slipped into, willingly at first, then with no clear escape. He found himself thinking in Spock's clipped cadence, speaking in Spock's emotionless register. Even at home, with his wife and children, the lines crept in. Conversations took on a robotic precision. Affection felt foreign, rehearsed. Each wrap of production only deepened the grooves in his psyche. Then came the rumors. Whispers that he'd grown tired of the endless rounds of fan mail, the suffocating devotion. Stories of a quiet tension on set. Creative disagreements with producers who refused to pay him fair royalties. Conflicts over how the character was portrayed. He was offered more money, bigger roles, but something inside had shifted. The fame that once dazzled now felt like chains. Each autograph became a weight, each public appearance a performance within a performance. The man who thrived on the stage and screen began to crave real-world simplicity. One rainy evening in Hollywood, he closed his front door behind him, not to step into his glamorous car, but to reach into a duffel bag and pull out a cabbie's uniform. He clipped on the badge, adjusted his cap, and walked out into the night. No entourage, no assistants, just him, the city grid, and a makeshift insignia that read, Cab number 47. He learned the routes, the back alleys, the hidden shortcuts. He memorized the quirks of his vehicle, a stubborn brake pedal, a flickering dome light, a rattle in the glove compartment. It was raw. It was honest. As he merged into traffic, his first passenger slid into the back seat. A bleary-eyed businessman who paid in crumpled bills, offered no small talk. The actor who once carried the weight of a universe on his shoulders said nothing. He simply steered, listened as raindrops pounded the roof, and let the city hum around him. In that confined space, he discovered a peace he hadn't known since childhood, a childhood far removed from Hollywood, in a cramped apartment filled with immigrant parents who taught him grit and perseverance. He remembered selling newspapers at dawn, washing dishes at night, dreaming of bigger stages. Now he was exactly where he needed to be. Word leaked quickly. Fans caught sight of him at a diner counter, still in uniform, sipping black coffee before a long shift. Tabloids shouted headlines. Spock goes rogue. Star Trek icon turns cabbie. Some mourned his fall from grace. Others cheered his reinvention. Overnight, he became a symbol not just of on-screen logic, but of off-screen courage. The courage to walk away from adoration and choose obscurity. Documentarians pounced, seeking interviews. Reporters dialed his number. Talk show hosts begged for footage. He refused them all. On the streets, though, strangers didn't care who he once was. They saw only a man doing his job. And in those genuine exchanges, a tip of gratitude, a simple thank you, the handshake of a satisfied writer. He found something fame never gave him: authenticity. He watched mothers soothe crying babies in the back seat. Lovers share hushed confessions on midnight drives. Exhausted workers pray for one last fare. Each story was a glimpse of real life, unscripted and unpredictable. It beat any line of dialogue he'd ever memorized. Night after night, as he navigated neon thoroughfares, he reflected on sacrifice. He remembered the bright glare of studio spotlights and the echo of applause in cavernous sound stages. Yet here, alone in a yellow cab, he felt more alive. Fame had offered accolades, driving offered connection. The choice seemed insane to some, a veteran actor turning his back on red carpets for city streets. But for him, it was the most logical decision he'd ever made. Daybreak arrived with a chill that seeped through the windows of his modest apartment, but he barely noticed. He left a note for his wife on the kitchen table, a simple, "Gone for a shift, be back after breakfast," and slipped into his taxi uniform, trying to recall the last time he'd felt this free. There were no studio executives waiting for him, no starlets vying for his attention, no cameras to capture his every move. Instead, there was the hum of an old meter, the soft rumble of the engine, and the promise of another anonymous night on the streets. It was a humility he had earned, a peace he had fought to find. Memories of his childhood surfaced in the quiet moments between fares. He remembered his parents, immigrants who wrestled hope from hardship, speaking Yiddish in a crowded tenement where beds were shared and privacy was mythical. His father trimmed hair 6 days a week, his mother patched torn clothes with precise stitches. They believed in survival above all else. "Beauty will come," his mother whispered one night as she sewed scraps into a dress for him. "But first you must endure." Those words had shaped him. Endure the auditions, the rejections, the endless nights under studio lights. He had endured, but now he sought more than endurance. He sought authenticity. Not everyone understood. Old friends in Hollywood called him suicidal, urged him back on his sound stages, convinced that turning his back on fame was just a phase. Critics labeled him ungrateful. Tabloids mocked his uniform. Interviewers demanded to know when the next Star Trek spinoff would beg him to return. But each scathing headline, each condescending question, only reinforced his conviction. Fame had offered applause. Streetlights offered earnest solitude. He traded scripts for driver logs, emotional scripts for conversations with lonely passengers. And with every ride, he reclaimed pieces of himself that he'd lost beneath the layers of makeup and the weight of public expectation. One night, a frail elderly woman hailed his cab under a flickering lamp. Her voice trembled, not from age alone, but from a fear he recognized, being unseen. He pulled up the partition, looked into her weary eyes, and introduced himself with a gentle smile. When she hesitated, he said, "Just call me Al." In the next 20 minutes, she spoke of a life spent caring for others, a husband long gone, children who lived out of state, and a hushed regret for dreams left behind. He listened, offering quiet empathy. When she paid the fare and stepped into the night, she touched his arm and whispered, "Thank you for noticing me." It happened again and again. Stories of hidden loss, unspoken longing, the small moments that go unnoticed by the glare of spotlights. An aspiring poet who'd lost her confidence. A single father too proud to ask for help. A night shift nurse scraping through coffee-fueled hours. In that cab, stripped of celebrity, he became not an icon but a fellow traveler. They shared confidences without knowing his true identity. He had found a secret theater where each passenger was both audience and performer, and he was the silent critic, absorbing every line, every pause, every trembling breath. As he drove, he also healed. Therapy had taught him that identity isn't a performance, but a tapestry woven from our choices, our scars, and our quiet triumphs. He had once believed that logic alone could shield him from pain. Instead, he discovered that logic needed balance, a measure of empathy, a degree of vulnerability. The job of taxi driving became a daily testament to that lesson. Each day, he sharpened emotional muscles dulled by years of artifice, reminding himself that compassion didn't weaken him, it grounded him. The city became his classroom, its inhabitants his teachers, and his yellow cab the lecture hall. Word of his secret vocation finally reached the media again, this time with curiosity rather than judgment. A local news crew caught him fueling his cab at dawn, cup of coffee in hand and a knowing grin on his face. Instead of recoiling, he welcomed the camera, not as an actor playing a role, but as a man sharing a story that spoke to something universal, the urge to escape masks, to find meaning in simplicity. Viewers watched as he advised a teenager facing eviction, as he counseled a veteran coping with memories of war. Each clip resonated like a parable of humanity. Yet for all the attention, he refused to abandon his meter or don a second skin. His life had become a polished paradox. The man who forsook galactic fame now shone brightest in the humblest setting. And so, he continued to drive. Through rain, through traffic, through the dawn of countless new days, knowing that another story would begin at his rear window. In that simple act, he found a fifth dimension more profound than space. The dimension of shared humanity. Under the incandescent glow of the dashboard light, he heard his daughter's voice for the first time in years. She didn't recognize him at first, just a cabbie in the night. But when she realized that the driver was the face she'd seen 1,000 times on her bedroom posters, the silence shattered. It was a moment he had both anticipated and feared, the collision of identities he had tried to keep separate. How could he be her father, broken by fame, if he remained the icon she once idolized? And yet in that revelation, he found a deeper bond, one built on vulnerability rather than stardom. His son's return came slower, marked by awkward tension and guarded steps. He remembered the door slammed in his face 5 years earlier, the echo that haunted his dreams. This time, he advanced with humility, stepping out of the cab and into his son's world without fanfare. He let the meter run, metaphorically speaking. He was willing to invest time, patience, and a readiness to listen. On his first attempt, his son offered a terse "thanks for the ride," then left. No warm embrace, no forgiving words. Only a door shutting gently, as if still unsure it belonged to a father. But he respected it. He knew that acceptance, like healing, couldn't be rushed. Between fares, he reflected on the paradox of presence and absence. Cameras had captured every scripted smile he ever gave, yet a father's genuine laughter and tears remained unseen. He vowed to rewrite that narrative. He dedicated weekdays to chauffeuring strangers and weekends to family dinners. Homemade soup, the clink of spoons against ceramic bowls, stories shared around a wobbling kitchen table. No teleprompters, no retakes, just real voices, flawed accents, and spontaneous laughter. He cherished each moment, aware that imperfection held more beauty than any flawless performance. An unexpected turn came when a life-or-death emergency unfolded in his back seat. A passenger went into cardiac arrest at 50 miles per hour. Instinct kicked in. He'd once directed armies of extras and led scenes of crisis. But this was unfiltered reality. He pulled the cab to a screeching halt, radioed for help, and performed chest compressions until paramedics arrived. The victim survived, and newspapers hailed the courageous cab driver. But for him, it meant something quietly profound. He realized that the simple act of saving a life carried weight that no award could match. He didn't wear a medal that night. He wore his uniform and carried gratitude that resonated deeper than applause. Word of his heroism spread beyond tabloids, reaching allies from his acting days. Directors and producers who once dismissed his departure now lauded his courage. Offers trickled back, small roles, voiceover work, even guest spots on television. They offered paychecks and publicity, appeals to ego and habit. But he paused to weigh them against the life he had rebuilt. In his kaleidoscope of experiences, the stage, the screen, his parents' tenement, the taxi's back seat, he realized that authenticity could not be traded. He declined the offers politely, explaining that his script had changed. He was no longer playing a part. He was living a purpose. His network of friends grew richer, too. Lifelong companions from youth reappeared, those who remembered him as a teenager chasing scripts and dreams rather than trophy cameras. They celebrated his resilience, welcomed him into low-key gatherings, and shared their own stories of disillusionment. In their laughter-filled kitchens, he reclaimed pieces of himself that had vanished behind studio walls. He told stories of automobile fare meters instead of box office earnings, of late-night shifts instead of red carpet galas. Each tale drew nods of recognition. Authenticity struck a chord in every soul weary of pretending. As months passed, he incorporated new rituals into his life. He carried a small notebook in his uniform pocket, jotting down memories from each ride, snippets of conversation, a phrase that lingered, a question that revealed hidden dreams. At home's quiet hours, he distilled these fragments into journal entries. Over time, those pages formed an unexpected anthology, a mosaic of humanity, seen through the lens of a taxi meter. He shared excerpts at community readings at local cafes, modest venues where strangers listened as avidly as they once had to his science fiction monologues. The applause felt different, softer but more honest. His evenings still began behind the wheel, but ended in the cozy sanctity of family. He taught his children to drive by his side, demonstrating the curves of city streets and life's turns. They laughed at his playful admonitions. Signal before you pivot on roads and relationships. They teased him about missing his old Hollywood style, encouraging him to call them Commander Spock when he gave driving instructions. In these interactions, he realized he'd found a balance. The son of immigrant parents, the father to new generations, the cab driver, and yes, once in a while, the legend who still raised a Vulcan salute for family photographs. But balance, he learned, requires vigilance. A single misstep, a tempting audition, a nostalgic invitation, could tip the scales. He declined a reunion special invite from a streaming service, citing conflicts with his driving schedule. Some fans wrote scathing letters. True friends offered quiet support. He returned to his meter, recalled the solace of anonymous strides down empty highways, and resolved that his legacy would not be molded by nostalgia, but by the daily commitment to choose truth over homage. In time, his story traveled beyond city limits. A best-selling memoir emerged from his journals, Miles of Discovery, recounting his transformation from intergalactic emissary to city commuter and back again to the essence of himself. It reached bestseller lists, not because of his name alone, but because readers recognized the universal quest within, the yearning to strip away artifice and embrace life's raw edges. He conducted interviews clothed in his taxi jacket, his words woven with warmth and humility, encouraging audiences everywhere to ask, "Where do you find your truth?" By now, he had learned a final lesson. Every identity we wear holds within it both power and danger. The actor he once was provided inspiration. The cab driver he became offered authenticity. The father he reclaimed brought purpose. The memoir he wrote created connection. In weaving those strands together, he discovered that true fulfillment isn't a single role but the harmony of them all. And so, when asked at last, "Who are you?" he answered, "I am every part I've ever chosen to be. Sometimes logical, sometimes human, always in search of what matters most." He stood at the edge of a crowded studio lot one afternoon, the sun glinting off polished trailers and the chatter of crews filling the air. A director approached, clipboard in hand, offering a small but significant role in a prestige miniseries. The part was tailor-made, a venerable elder imparting wisdom, a subtle nod to the years spent charting alien worlds. The offer gleamed with temptation, primetime exposure, substantial pay, a chance to reconnect with the craft he once loved. Yet, as he glanced at the cab uniform folded neatly in his duffel, he felt a familiar tug. The road he'd chosen still pulsed with authenticity. With a gentle smile, he declined, explaining that his current journey required a different spotlight, one cast by the headlights of his yellow taxi. Rejection of that invitation sparked industry chatter. "He's burned too many bridges," some murmured. Others whispered admiration. He refused the Hollywood machine twice now, in pursuit of something deeper. Yet the public learned none of this. To them, he remained the unobtrusive cab driver with an uncanny knack for ghoul and sprocket trivia, a nickname given affectionately by longtime writers who marveled at his encyclopedic knowledge of old sci-fi serials. Each return fare brought a fresh wave of curiosity, and passengers soon learned to ask playful questions. "Ever feel like you're floating through space on these city streets?" He'd chuckle and reply, "Every trip is an expedition, just with fewer green screens." While Hollywood gates quietly swung shut, the world beyond the studio fences opened wider. A nonprofit approached him, requesting his presence at a youth arts workshop to demonstrate how perseverance shaped his career. He agreed at once. Standing before a classroom of hopeful performers, he told stories of his tenement childhood, of selling greeting cards and ushering in theaters, of how each small job honed skills that would later serve him on grander stages. He spoke of logic intertwined with empathy, of understanding a character's heart before embodying their role. He watched their eyes widen as he revealed that earning a university degree in the humanities mattered less than earning a living wage to continue dreaming. and that sometimes the most important dream is simply to be genuine. His commitment to community deepened. On weekends, he volunteered at a local LGBTQ youth center, sharing the micro-lessons learned from Spock's message of acceptance. In that sanctuary, he guided teens through improvisation games and listened to their stories of finding belonging. He recalled his own battles with identity, when the rigid persona of Spock threatened to eclipse his humanity, and encouraged them to embrace every facet of their souls. Logic, he'd say, is powerful, but it must always be balanced with kindness. In return, they gifted him drawings of a yellow cab emblazoned with pointy Vulcan ears, a whimsical homage that tickled him more than any film credit. At home, the rhythms of taxi life and fatherhood settled into a comfortable cadence. Mornings began with breakfast at a sunlit table, where newspapers lay open beside schoolbooks, and evenings closed with bedtime stories by flashlight, his children drifting off to science fiction tales spiced with real-life morals. His wife, ever his anchor, kept him grounded, reminding him that a taxi's meter could measure distance, but not the miles traveled within the heart. She preserved their modest garden, where tomatoes and basil flourished in reclaimed wooden crates, and encouraged him to plant seeds of kindness wherever he roamed. Then came the unexpected turning point. An independent filmmaker, captivated by local legends of a former star-turned-driver, proposed a documentary chronicling his dual life. Filming began over coffee in exactly the same diner where tabloids once snapped candid shots. They captured him recounting late-night conversations with a grief-stricken father, comforting a stranded traveler on Christmas Eve, patching a flat tire for a returning veteran. These moments glowed with an honesty that even the most elaborate studio setup couldn't replicate. As the footage unfolded, audiences saw not a superstar hiding behind sunglasses, but a man whose greatest role was sharing humanity's raw, unscripted performance. When the documentary premiered at a regional film festival, the response was electric. Viewers cheered and wept, struck by the simplicity and power of small acts. Critics called it a masterclass in authenticity, a beam of hope in cynical times, and festival directors extended invitations worldwide. He accepted select screenings, always wearing casual clothes rather than formal attire, greeting viewers at the exit doors as eagerly as he once signed autographs. Discussions ensued about societal value, the price of fame, and the ability of one person to redefine success. He fielded their questions with humility, each answer a thread weaving logic and compassion into a tapestry that resonated beyond borders. Later that year, he received a letter from a former co-star, an unexpected olive branch. It read, in part, "Watching your journey reminds me that we all chase stars, but the greatest light comes from within." He framed the letter and hung it in the kitchen, where morning sunlight pooled across its words. The sentiment reflected the truth he'd discovered. True illumination stems not from celebrity, but from the courage to choose authenticity over applause. As seasons turned, so did his perspective on legacy. He began mentoring young drivers at the taxi depot, teaching them conflict de-escalation, the art of active listening, and the importance of empathy under pressure. They admired his Hollywood past, but they learned more from the way he navigated an angry customer or lent a supportive ear to a colleague facing eviction. He reinforced that every person encountered carried a story, a universe of hopes and fears, just waiting to be acknowledged. On a crisp autumn night, he parked his cab under a lamppost near the city theater and leaned back in the driver's seat. He closed his eyes and let the distant echo of applause wash over him, not from a filmed performance, but from the soft rush of passing traffic, the polite words of a commuter, the gentle breathing of a sleeping child in a nearby home. In that hush, he realized that his journey, from immigrant tenements to the bridge of the Enterprise, from public adoration to behind-the-scenes guidance, had always been about connection. The role he'd taken was never merely Spock. It was every person he'd ever been and every life he had touched. He often parked his cab outside the community center, the neon sign glowing like a distant star beckoning weary travelers. Inside, local volunteers greeted youth and seniors, offering classes in art, music, and resilience. He spent hours teaching improvisation, reminding participants that every story matters. As he guided a teenager through a spontaneous monologue, she paused, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "You see me." That simple confession echoed through his heart, not as an actor portraying vulnerability, but as a human who had learned to embrace it. Beyond these walls, his yellow cab continued to thread the city's arteries. He reveled in the transitions, from the urgent pulse of rush hour to the hushed quiet of midnight lanes. Each journey felt like a narrative arc: introduction, conflict, resolution. He documented them all in his notebook, a habit that grounded him in gratitude. Leafing through pages of scribbled dialogue, he found solace in the truth that compassion and curiosity could illuminate more than spotlights ever did. Yet, the call of screens remained persistent. A streaming platform executive invited him to narrate a nature documentary, believing his voice would lend gravitas to scenes of soaring eagles and whispering forests. The proposal was generous: a lavish allowance, high-tech studios, primetime credits. For a moment, he was tempted by the familiar pull of production values and creative control. But he hesitated. Would lending his voice to distant landscapes dilute the authenticity of his everyday expeditions? He declined, opting instead to produce a small podcast series featuring real stories from his backseat. Each episode captured confessions from cab windows, overdue farewells, spontaneous proposals, confessions of regret and hope. The intimacy of unedited voices resonated more deeply than any orchestrated score. Decades after first strapping on pointy ears, he discovered that legacy wasn't measured by iconic images printed on lunchboxes. It thrived in the ripples of kindness, those fleeting gestures exchanged between strangers. He remembered how, in his earliest cab days, a weary teacher once held his hand and whispered, "You're the best listener I've met." That remark, lodged in his memory, sparked a lifelong commitment to presence, to that profound act of simply giving undivided attention. The seasons changed. Snow-muffled tires on winter streets. Petals drifted in spring breezes. Summer storms drenched the asphalt, and autumn leaves danced around tires. Through it all, he maintained a steady rhythm: sunrise pickups, midnight drops. He welcomed paramedics rushing to emergencies, consoling mourners returning from funerals, guiding jubilant partygoers to celebrations. Each shift reaffirmed his belief that the rawest human moments unfold away from studio sets, in the chaotic poetry of everyday lives. One chilly December morning, as frost clung to the windows, a chauffeur-driven hearse overtook his taxi. Its solemn procession drew his gaze, reminding him of the fragility of time. He parked momentarily, slipping inside the back seat, where pallbearers arranged wreaths. He bowed his head in silent tribute to a stranger he'd never met. In that gesture, he felt the full weight of mortality and the urgency of seizing every chance to connect. That same day, his wife approached him with a folded newspaper. On the op-ed page, an essay praised his life's work, not as Spock, but as a symbol of humanity's capacity for reinvention. Readers wrote about how his story inspired them to pursue second acts, to redefine success on their own terms. He smiled, remembering how he once swapped red carpets for city streets, an act that at the time had felt so daunting. Now he realized it had been the bravest chapter of all. He carried on with grace. Occasionally, he encountered die-hard fans who tossed questions between fair updates. "Do you miss the Enterprise?" he asked them. Most laughed, replying, "We see you're exactly where you belong." Those moments validated his choice, not as celebrity affirmation, but as mutual recognition of shared authenticity. In quiet intervals between rides, he reflected on the paradox of public image. Once, he believed that fame could protect him, give him influence, secure his family's future. But it had nearly cost him his sense of self. The logical man he played had demanded detachment, and it almost rendered him incapable of feeling. By leaving fame behind, he rediscovered empathy, resilience, and purpose. Late one evening, as he folded his uniform and prepared to hang it for another day, he paused before the rearview mirror. Rather than the character's calm visage or a celebrity's veneer, he saw a man defined by choices: a son of immigrants, a failed actor, a movie legend, a taxi driver, a devoted husband, a rebuilding father, a community advocate, a mentor, a diarist, a listener, and the author of his own life script. Years later, he found himself standing at the threshold of a school auditorium. surrounded by students whose faces glowed under stage lights brighter than any spotlight he had ever known. They looked to him not as Spock or a star, but as a mentor who had navigated life's twists with courage and curiosity. The message he delivered that evening echoed through silent rows of desks. Success, he said, is not a title, a paycheck, or applause. It is the promise you keep to yourself to follow the path that makes your spirit soar. He spoke of resilience learned in immigrant tenements, of roles embraced and abandoned, and of a taxi's hum transforming from background noise into a melody of human connection. He reminded them that every passenger carried untold stories, and that listening with an open heart could change a life. As he left the stage, a rising ovation followed, not for a legendary actor, but for a genuine guide who had transformed hardship into wisdom. That night, back in his yellow cab, he navigated city streets bathed in moonlight. He remembered the first passenger he'd ferried after hanging up his Hollywood suit, a solitary woman seeking companionship, whose brief smile had felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. In every meter tick and rumbling turn, he found echoes of all he had been and become. The final miles of his shift carried him past a children's hospital where nurses waved at his cab through frost-laced windows. He slowed to let them know that someone outside cared, that light and logic coexisted in every gesture. A final fare of the evening hopped in, a young artist clutching a tattered portfolio, voices inside trembling with nervous hope. She confessed she'd been rejected 100 times, that each no felt like a dagger in her ambition's heart. He leaned forward, offering gentle reassurance. Every rejection refines your purpose. Then he told her of his own failures, of flopped films, of roles lost to typecasting, of the nights he drove a cab because his bank account had dried to nothing. She listened, tears pooling as she realized. Success wasn't a straight ascent. It was a winding road navigated with patience. When she paid the fare, she pressed her portfolio into his hands. Inside were sketches of Spock and a yellow cab intertwined, a tribute to two halves of one man. He promised to drive her to her next audition free of charge, but more importantly, he promised to believe in her journey. As she departed, she looked back and mouthed, "Thank you." And he realized that impact often unfolds in silent exchanges. That night, he turned off the meter for the last time and drove home under a sky strewn with stars, knowing that each mile archived a story, each fare a connection, and every turn a lesson in the art of being human. He opened his front door to the warmth of his home, where laughter echoed in the hallway and a familiar embrace greeted him. His children waited with drawings of spaceships and city streets, a heartfelt reminder that life's greatest roles are played at home. He set aside his uniform and let the weight of collars and badges fall away, welcoming the simple fabric of family life. Then he settled into his favorite armchair, the one once used to polish his starched costumes, and exhaled. In that hush, as moonlight filtered through curtains, he reflected on a life scripted by choice rather than circumstance. No longer was he confined to a studio set or a taxi seat. He was the author of each chapter he chose to write. His legacy would not be measured in episodes filmed or miles driven, but in moments of connection that transcended any script. He closed his eyes and whispered into the empty room, "Live long," then smiled as he cuffed his hands together in a silent salute to his own journey. In that moment, starships and taxi meters, cameras and parental hands, converged into a single truth. The most profound voyages aren't charted in space. They're charted in the bonds we forge each day. And so, as dawn began to stain the horizon gold, he rose, slipped into his cab one more time, and greeted the world with a quiet purpose. For every meter tick held a story, and every story held a spark of change waiting to be ignited. Live long and prosper. Indeed, for life's richest wealth lies in the journeys that shape our shared humanity. He drove on, carrying that truth through every turn of his tireless wheels. Each sunrise marked not just a new route, but the endless promise of connection that defines us all. This was his final frontier,